I often have the privilege of helping both learners and educators who are having difficulty connecting. And often this is in the case of resident remediation. And in this case, what's happening is the resident is having difficulty learning the way the teacher's teaching, or the teacher's having trouble reaching the learner. What I often find is that the core of this is that they don't understand each other's learning styles, specifically experiential learning styles, and they're coming at it from a different way. A great example of this, classic example of this, is somebody that is great at the books who has difficulty with the skills, or somebody who's great at skills who has difficulty with the books. These are an expression of experiential learning styles. Those who have better skills are actually what we're going to call doers, and those who have better book knowledge are often called theorists. Experiential learning styles are different than the visual, auditory, kinesthetic that you're used to. Experiential learning styles take into account the way people learn from doing, their experience, and reflect the experiential learning cycle. So to start, let's review the experiential learning cycle. When I talk about experiential learning styles and experiential learning in general, I'm going to use common language. I'm going to speak normal English rather than some of the theoretical terms. I encourage you to start reading further into some of Kolb's original works that have different terminology, that have more depth than what I'm going to talk about, but I'm trying to help people understand a difficult concept. So for experiential learning, the cycle as simply is do, reflect, think, redo. We constantly go through a cycle, do, reflect, think, redo. We're talking about experiential learning styles. What happens is people have certain tendencies or certain areas that they like to start in or sometimes even stay in. And what happens is the more a style fits a person, the longer they're going to want to stay in that corner or that quadrant. Those who like to do and reflect, I call reflectors. Reflectors often are very good at looking back at their previous experiences. Reflectors also are ones that will love the flipped classroom. In between reflecting and thinking, we have the theorists. The theorists want to understand everything about how does something work. They're often ones diving deep into the research and into the education. In between thinking and redoing, we have practical people. Practical people want to understand the why. Why does this matter to me? And then between those who like to redo and do, we have the flat old doers. They love to just dive in and try it. And you've seen this in the classes. The doers are the first ones that they'll volunteer for everything. The reflectors want to watch them do it first, then they'll do it. The theorists are the ones we have to kind of push a bit to try it. And the practical people will do it as soon as we give them a reason why. To figure out your learning style, you should actually download or do the paper version of the Kolb Learning Style Inventory. To provide you a simple way to do this, just to give you a little idea of where you're at, I'm going to use two examples from real life to see which one fits you best. So the first example I like to use is how do people learn to raise their children. And I talk about things that people do at home because your learning style at home reflects the way you actually learn rather than how you've learned to pass a test. So those who are reflectors look back at how they were raised, how their aunts and uncles were, and how others raised their kids. In today's technology, they'd be people watching the YouTube videos on it. The theorists read the books about it, what to expect and you're expecting and Dr. Spock and all those other things. And the problem is they get stuck so far in the theory that they may actually not do it. The practical people say, well, I have a diaper rash. What do I do? And the doers just dive in and try it. Good thing kids bounce. The other example I like to use is hobbies. And one of the hobbies that I call it that, or I have had, was I was rebuilding a house. And if anyone has done this, it's a lot of work, but I was reglazing windows. And when you're doing that, you're rebuilding windows. If I was a reflector, I'd watch videos on how other people do it, or watch a master do that. A theorist, I'd read everything about it. How does the putty actually connect wood to glass? Practical people say, well, how much of a check do I have to write to get this done? And the doers, well, they've already broken 9 panes, so they might as well break the other 12. The other example, just for fun, I'd like to give you, is travel. A reflector travels for the memory. I often know reflectors because their phones are full of pictures. A theorist will read everything about the location. They'll read about the history, about what's going on. The practical people have kind of a list. And you see this a lot in practical people. I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this. The doers in travel, they flip a coin. Go left, go right. Doesn't matter. So what happens is once you have an idea of your learning style, you can actually understand the way you teach, because the way you learn is the way you teach. And learning styles, in this case, experiential learning styles, usually set about by about age 10, and they're not concrete, and they are generalizations, but it's kind of like intubation. In anesthesia, they have this argument about, do you like a curve or a straight blade? The research on that kind of says whichever one started working for you is the one you like the best. Well, with learning styles, it's somewhat the same. And what will happen is, once you know your learning style, that's where you'll start. Those who have a doing learning style will just dive in and try it. They're the ones that love simulation, have no problem doing it. They may not love the debriefing as much, but they love simulation. Reflectors love the debriefing. They love watching the videos of it. Reflectors are also the ones that will like the flipped classroom, where they can see it afterwards or understand it afterwards. Theorists, they want the whole lecture. They want the whole process. And one of the things about theorists is people that are theorists by nature often become educators or researchers. That's often why education has a strong theoretical basis. In healthcare, that may not match all of our learners. The practical people look at it and just say, well, what am I going to do with this? And once they get that, they're golden. I'll give you an example of this. If we sent out articles to be read, given that they had time, the reflector would actually read the article after they had the experience. The theorist would read the whole article, read the references, dive in deeper. The practical person would read just the abstracts. And the doer would never read the article. Now, those are all generalizations, but they're somewhat true. And what happens is, when you start understanding people's learning styles, you start understanding which choices to make. So I'm often asked, when should I do the lecture? My first answer is don't, but if you have to, the theorist wants the whole lecture first, everything. The reflector would actually want the lecture after the experience. The practical learner would actually want just the cliff notes, kind of what do I care about? And the doer never wants the lecture. When you go into simulation, you should let the doer try it first, then the reflector. Once the practical person understands what to do, they'll do it, and then the theorist, we have to kind of push into it. What happens is, you start understanding learning styles, you start understanding where we're having some of these mismatches. Somebody that's a teacher, that's a theorist, who has a doer as a student, will say, well, that person just doesn't have the fount of knowledge or doesn't understand what's going on. And they'll argue heavily that the person has to understand the theory first. The doers will say, well, let me try it first, then explain it to me. On the other hand, if I have somebody that's a doer, what happens is, if the doer is a teacher and they have a theorist student, they'll say they just never do anything. They're just busy thinking. What ends up happening is, the opposite learning style from where you are is your weakness. So it's no wonder that the doers have difficulty on the tests. And then what we do is, we give the doers bad advice. We say, well, for a study and test, we say read more. Well, that's not how they learn. What we actually need to do is connect to their experiences. If we gave them each a 3-patient review, so each night they go home, take 3 experiences they had, look them up in something like Up to Date or some quick review, and tie that to their experiences, they'd actually do better. So we need to adjust our learning to match the learning style, and the learner also has to adjust to the educator. So the advice I give is such. I tell the reflectors to tell their preceptors, show me once, then I'll do it. For the theorists, I tell them to tell their preceptor, explain to me how it works, then I'll do it. For the practical people, I have them say, please to explain to me why it works, or why do I care, then I'll do it. And then for the doer, I say, well, let me try it, then explain it to me. Now, that doesn't always work in real life, but in simulation it does. Your own learning style, it reflects your teaching style. And what you'll do is, you'll stay in that area. And what happens is, people start getting stuck in whatever they think, however they learn is how they think others learn. That's why you'll see some people that are really big book learners, and they'll say, well, we have to get rid of the theory, and we have to, or they'll say it should all be simulation. Well, it depends on your learners. Now, I have actually tested thousands of nurses and physicians to look at learning styles. Here's what I found. What I found is, actually the learning style tends to reflect the area somebody's in, or specialty, rather than actually the job function. And within healthcare as a whole, we have a large shift. I mean, they're probably 2/3 or more are in the doers or the practical quadrant. That's why sometimes we lose learners when we spend too much time on either reflecting or in the theory quadrant. If you refer to learning card 3A, you will see that there are different trends based on specialty. Surgeons tend to be much more practical. If then, if I cut this, then what happens? Anesthesiologists tend to be more theoretical. I've gone around, I've asked the question in many situations, when's the last time you used a Krebs cycle on a patient? I've only had 3 doctors ever say they've done it, and 2 of them were anesthesiologists. Makes sense. I also wonder sometimes then, well, why do we teach it to everybody else? But that's a separate discussion. The doers, well, they're in the ED. They're doing it. And the reflectors are things like family medicine and outpatient medicine, psychiatric medicine. People wonder why we have trouble getting family medicine docs. Well, it may be because a large percentage of our students are actually practical, which is the opposite of the reflectors, and because there's a push and pull between productivity and patient experience. Those who are practical tend to have higher productivity. Those who are reflectors tend to have higher patient satisfaction. That being said, I can teach somebody who's very practical to have better patient satisfaction by making it purposeful, by explaining that having a better patient relationship will actually improve their productivity. So when you're approaching a group, you need to shift the learning to meet the group. I was working with a physician who does a difficult airway course, and he's teaching an anesthesiologist, and it was an 8-hour course and 6 hours of lecture. And I'm like, wow, can't we do more simulation? I mean, it's just an hour and a half, 2 hours of simulation. I mean, difficult airway is something we should do hands-on. But he was right. His group, with an anesthesiology group, they loved the 6 hours of lecture. That being said, give the same course to the ED doc, and they'd say, kill me now. In summary, when you look at learning styles, there's 4 types: reflectors, theorists, practical, and doers. Understanding your style and the style of your learner can help you match. When you're first trying to reach a learner, it will often be easier to match an educator with a learner of the same learning style, but over time you'll actually want to switch it so they have something the opposite to fill in the blanks or the weaknesses that they have.